graduate school full-time as well, which leads to my educational background, which I have a bachelor's degree in Christian ministry. I have a master's degree of ministry, and also I'm just about done with a PhD in education leadership. And that's I believe that's going to benefit me, because ultimately anyone that watches what takes place with our U.S. Congress knows that at any given time, depending on what's taking place with world affairs, things can adjust at the drop of a dime. And if a person's not able and adapt to be able to adjust to those changes, then it's going to be a challenge for them to be fully functional. I will be fully functional because, again, I've served in community as far as a community leader, and that's been with the nonprofit organization. I've served as a professor. I've served as a public school teacher. I've served in the military as a logistics sergeant. And so I've been able to see things from multiple points of view. And again, I've served as an educator teaching critical thinking. And so by all means, keeping in mind that when it comes to the U.S. Congress, critical thinking will be essential. It will be a must-have. And so going in there with the tools not only to understand critical thinking, but as a one that's instructed people on how to think critically, I believe I'll be effective for Congressional District 15 with such diversity, because it's going to be something that's going to be a challenge for people on a day-to-day basis.
And what would be some of those issues that you would be pushing for if you make it to Congress?
To start, and I personally have a 100-day goal, and that 100-day goal is going to be one, to make sure we take care of our veterans. As we look at what's taking place with our veterans now, particularly if we look at RGV in the Valley, we see that our veterans have been in need. They've been literally promised a hospital for so long, and it's decades-old promise that's never been answered. So as a veteran of the United States Army, I'll be going to fight for those veterans tirelessly when I get there, to make sure that, one, they no longer have to wait. And people have said it for years, and we've heard the rhetoric, but it's not been fulfilled. I'll make sure that they're not having to wait those long months at a time in order to be seen. I'll make sure, one, I'll be fighting for an access card. I believe that a veteran that served their country faithfully and with loyalty, I believe that they deserve, not just have earned it, but they deserve a right to be able to choose who they go and see, and to be able to be seen in a reasonable amount of time. So I'll fight to make sure they have a health care access card, so if they can't be seen in a reasonable amount of time through the VA system, then they can go and see whichever doctor they'd like to see, because we've already paid for that cost, and they've already paid the cost. Secondly, what I hold in my hand is from the National Border Patrol Council. I'm the only candidate right now that's currently running, regardless of party, that sat down with these people, with these hard workers, with the people that are protecting our borders. I've had at least a 2-hour conversation with them. I personally toured the border with a private tour with them, and I've sat down with them for over an hour and a half in particular, talking about issues. So I won't go into Congress with assumptions as to what our agents need. In that first 100 days, I know exactly what they need to do their jobs more efficiently and more effectively. So I will go there with a plan to make sure they have the needed resources to get the job done, and to make sure that we have this thing called border security and intact, and make sure it's going in the right direction, because right now it's not.
And we know that they've asked for a lot of money, particularly troopers, DPS, but also Border Patrol. What are some of the issues that they've perhaps mentioned to you that they need?
Yes, right off, keep in mind, our Border Patrol agents, they're taking an abundant amount of time just to train our agents. So what we're seeing, we're having trained agents that's having to take a ton of time just to process people that they're catching on the border that's coming in illegally. And so what's taking place, we're having an upwards of 200 agents at any given time that's processing. We're talking about highly trained Border Patrol agents, and they're taking, if they're doing that efficiently, it's going to take them about 2 hours to process an individual. And so they're doing processing when they could be out actually been in the field doing their job. In addition to that, these agents are challenged with having to do babysitting duties. Can you imagine this for a moment? An agent has waited, in some cases 18 months in order to join this agency. And then once they've been trained, they're having to literally babysit. And so these things, we want to relieve these agents of doing that. So one of my goals is to make sure that we can get some low-level GS workers in there that's going to be cleared, of course, have the proper clearance to at least process, so that we can have more boots on the ground that we already have. Also, if we look at the U.S. Congress right now, it authorizes 21,000 Border Patrol agents for the United States. Right now, they're undermanned with that. They're only at about 19,000. Of that 19,000, literally about 1 out of every 4 is going to be on the management side. So it's time now to replace and make sure that we have, one, that level of 21,000 up to par. Two, we have to make sure that we increase the boots on the ground. And thirdly, which is going to be the most important thing, this thing that I have in my pocket, which I carry with me at all times, is the U.S. Constitution. One of my goals will be to make sure we uphold this Constitution, because our agents feel in many cases, and again, I've talked to not just one agent, but multiple agents, they're feeling that they're up against the wall, because if we can't uphold this Constitution to make sure that those that cross our borders illegally are going to be held accountable, and that there's going to be an expedited process to make sure that they're going back to where they came from, then we're going to continue to have what we call a carrot being waved on the other side, and it's going to be incentive for people to come into our country illegally. And keep in mind, we know that there's a lot going on in other countries, and I like to clarify, because a lot of people get the misconception that these people that are coming into our country illegally are all coming from Mexico. And that's not the truth. The fact of the matter is the majority of the people that's coming into America illegally, they're not from Mexico. They may come through Mexico, but we have to secure both the northern and the southern borders. We have to give them the resources and tools they need. And one thing I want to do also, because I understand the plight of the people that's coming here, they're going through some difficult times. There's a reason they're coming into America. There's a reason they're coming to our nation. We know that they're serving just purposes when they come here. In many cases, they're filling gaps where people would not work in America. So we know this. We know that many of them are facing hard times, even facing death in their home countries. So they're coming here for a reason. My goal when I get to Congress, one, is to help our Border Patrol agents to secure our borders, but also to make sure that we can really look at our immigration process and do things that's going to help those that cannot truly afford to wait years and to pay the amounts of money that it takes in order to come into this country legally. We know that there are a lot of people that can come here and really contribute to our society when it comes to paying taxes, when it comes to increasing our education journey as far as those that are coming here for education purposes. Why not do what we can to help to expedite that process so that we can see taxpayers' dollars increase and not decrease by paying for people that are here illegally but not seeing a return in that investment?
And you mentioned the immigration process.
Yes.
And just taking a few steps back, going to the veterans. There are some veterans who have served our country but are undocumented immigrants, and
Yes.
they don't have any help either because of their legal situation. Do you have a comment on that?
Absolutely.
How you would help them?
Yeah, I believe, again, what we're going to want to do is look at our process again. If we have veterans and they serve honorably, and they've done their time and they've done their time honorably, I believe that we should indeed have those expedited processes. And of course, we have processes now that are already in place for our veterans that serve, that are undocumented immigrants. But we want to make sure that we look at that process and revamp it, because obviously it's not working. I've seen the veterans, I've seen them in different countries that have served our nation. I'm talking about from the Vietnam era all the way up to the Iraq era, all the way up to Afghanistan era. And some of those veterans are now not even able to come into the country legally. Now, be it as it may, we know that a lot of times, in some of these instances rather, they've broken some laws and things of that nature. But if we were to look at the front end and say, you know what, by the time they get out of the military and they've served honorably, what can we do to make sure this process is expedited so that not only them, but their immediate family members also will have access to come into this country legally and gain citizenship?
And we have two other hot topics. We
Yes.
have, we know the gun situation right now is a very hot topic, but also we know that a lot of the abortion clinics in Texas have been shut down. One of them still stands in McAllen. What are your thoughts on that, on
Yes.
abortion?
Well, I'll start with abortion. I will address the Second Amendment issue as well with gun control. When it comes down to abortion, we have to understand that in the United States alone, we have literally about 3,000 babies that's been aborted every single day. We're talking about almost 1 million per year. 1 million per year. And so that number is staggering. And what I tell people, I challenge them to think about this for a moment. If we lost almost 3,000 people in one day due to any other event in America, that would be considered a huge tragedy, and our government would do something about it. And keep in mind, some people will say, well, what about the people that are raped? And that's unfortunate. What I would like to do as a lawmaker is make sure that we strengthen the laws. So if someone's involved in a rape or an incest, that they're going to have the book thrown at them, that's going to discourage them to do anything ever like that again. And that only represents about 1% of the women that are having abortions. In addition, the three main reasons women are saying they're having abortions: one is they say that the child care is going to be expensive. Two, they say it's going to interfere with their day-to-day lives. And the third thing that they say is that simply they cannot afford a child. And so many of them are single as well. And so those things we can assist on. How can we provide an answer to that? Keep this in mind. It was never intended for our government to utilize tax dollars to pay for abortions in any form or fashion. And so with that being said, we have to look and say, is it fair for taxpayers to fund any type of abortions? What we should do, we look at the hundreds of millions of dollars that's going from taxpayers to fund abortion. Why not take that money and redirect it? Because we need more counselors on board. We need to make sure that we streamline our adoption process. Right now, our adoption process is going to be quite cumbersome. It's quite expensive. So we have, literally millions of people, for that matter, that would love to adopt children, but they cannot afford to go through the process, and it's so long. Why not streamline that, provide counseling not only for the people that's willing to give up those children, but provide counseling for the ones that's going to accept those children. We can redirect those funds because the funding's already available. Let's do that so we can save the children's lives.
And what commitment is there to improve women's health care in this case? Because some say, these abortion clinics aren't just abortion clinics, that, Planned Parenthood helps with other women's health issues. What commitment would there be?
Keep in mind, when we look at that, we already have things available. When it comes down to improving our economy, if we improve our economy, that's going to mean that we're going to have more people employed. If more people employed, that means that they're going to be able to have access to private insurance so that they can make sure that women's health care is taken care of. In addition to that, there is nothing wrong with us being able to say we're going to make sure we have some type of public funding that's going to be married and matched up with some type of private funding so that we can still do those things that's going to be taking care of women's health. But we don't have to marry those things together in one bundle so that the things that are going to be in conflict, such as the abortion that's coming from taxpayers' dollars, when we have those things tied together, you're going to have the conflict. And so why not separate the two and let them be separate bills and say, let's go ahead and fund this, but we can do this separately. If it passes, it does. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And so we want to look at that. And so that's going to be an option to make sure that we keep those things separate. And that way people are not criticized and ostracized for being able to say, you know what, I want to, and keep in mind, I'm going to digress for a moment. Often when we see these things bundled together and people like me, Lord willing, I make it to Congress, vote against, and I will. That's got to be clear. I'm pro-life. I'm 100% pro-life, and that will not change. So when I vote against something, it's quick for people to say, oh, he's against women's health. No, I'm not against women's health. I have a daughter. I have a wife. I have sisters. And by all means, I want their health taken care of. But what can we do to make sure that we're funding that health care without hurting those that have different mindsets and different visions and also different things that they value for themselves as human beings? And so that's what I'll look at. How can we provide additional or other funding for them? And that way we can make sure that we're looking at our republic in a democratic way to help all people.
And lastly, on the issue with gun control, in the Valley recently there have been a lot of threats of lockdowns because a child might be armed with a gun. How can we improve their security in schools while we're still fighting to protect our Second Amendment right?
Okay. Once again, when we look at things, sometimes when we look at things like gun control and our Second Amendment rights, these things are really taken out of context in a lot of cases. And I'd like to just share a number with you. On average, they say we have about 30,000 gun deaths per year. But what people don't tend to know is that 2/3 of those gun deaths are going to be due to suicides. 2/3. So when we look at the 2/3 due to suicides, then that's going to leave us with about 10,000 gun deaths, roughly 10,000 or so gun deaths per year. Now, by all means, one death by way of a gun is one death too many. But when we look at that number, 10,000 versus the 30,000, then we can see it in a better perspective. And keep in mind, right now we have over 300 million guns on the streets. There's no way we're not going to be able to get those guns off the streets. We have to understand what the reason for the Second Amendment was in the first place, and it was to protect ourselves against a government that was going to come to a point where they're going to be in an uprising against the people. And it wasn't so much for individuals to say, I'm going to hunt, etc. And so what can we do? We can begin to educate parents on better gun control and different things when it comes to safety. We can make sure that, again, we're not looking at guns as the problem, because ultimately, when we look at countries that have taken gun control into consideration and taken the guns off the street, it did not decrease the rate of crime. It did not decrease, in a sense, the rate of crime, because they were being killed by other things, whether it was going to be knives or bats or you name it, because if people want to kill, they're going to do it. But I do want to point out to people again, with that in perspective, We hear much more about gun control. That's killing on average about 10,000 people a year outside of the suicides. What do we do with those 20,000 plus with the suicides? Again, we put more money towards counseling so that we can counsel the people with the mental health issues, because it is a mental health issue with the majority of the people with the guns. When we look at places like Chicago, Illinois, and we know that they have an extremely high gun rate and death gun rate thing going on with them right now, even this year, they have some of the strongest laws in the nation. But the rate of murders with guns continue to rise. They hadn't become to a point where they decreased, but we see there's been an increase in those gun deaths. So do additional laws help? No, that's going to be a prime example whereby we can study it from years past and see that it does not decrease the violence. So what do? We need to counsel those with mental health issues. We need to make sure that we're providing people with the right education when it comes down to weapons and the proper means of using those weapons. We need to make sure that we're doing these things when it comes down to education. And finally, I will say from a personal point of view, I've seen the violence when it comes down to guns, and so some will say, okay, all people of his party, they're all about the guns. But the fact of the matter is, I'm a human being, and I believe that the right to bear arms is going to be one of our inalienable rights, and we should have it. As a child growing up, I witnessed, my mother, my father attempted to kill my mother at one point with my siblings in the home. And keep in mind, she was shot by my father once before. And the second time around, the only reason my mother survived was because she returned fire. She was bearing arms. Had she not been bearing arms, not only her, but we probably could have been killed as well, because we know that when bullets become things that are flying, it does not have a name. It can hit anyone. And so I know personally, so even though we went through that, my mother actually shot my father to save her life and our lives. And I still, by all means, I love my father and I love my mother. They're both deceased now for different reasons. But do I digress and say that because of that, we should take away the weapons? No, it was because of my mother's right to bear arms that I may still be alive today. And so I understand what takes place there. I understand what happens there. I understand how people can grow with concern. But we don't take away that right because numbers are basically escalated and blown out of proportion. We look at the facts. And I'll close with this. We see more about the 10,000, I say 10,000, not 30,000, the average that's spoken about because of the mental health issue with 2/3. But we see the 10,000 on average per year, and we see more fuss about that than we do with the 3,000 per day. You multiply that 3,000 per day on average times 7 days, that's 21,000 babies that never got a chance to live, never got a chance to speak. But we have more challenges and more problems and more concern about the 10,000 deaths than we do on average the 21,000 per week. There's a problem. We need to redirect what we're going to do and what we're going to do with our resources and how we're going to do it. That's one of the reasons I'm going to U.S. Congress. We have to make a change, and we have to make sure the voices of the masses are being heard, and the masses are that 1 million children that cannot speak for themselves.
And lastly, tomorrow is Election Day. What is your message for the community in the Rio Grande Valley, specifically the Hispanic community? They'll be listening.
My message for them is that I believe in we the people. I've never gotten to a point where I looked at the community, quote unquote, as the Hispanic community, but I looked at them as we the people. Every single individual, whether they're in the northern portion of the district, the central portion of the district, or RGV, they're people with genuine needs. And I've went down more than one occasion. I've listened to the people. I've listened to their concerns. I know them as individuals, as humans. Whether they're Republican, whether they're a Democrat, whether they're Libertarian, whether they're Green Party, whether they're independent, my goal is to go and do exactly what our founding fathers intended, which is to go and be a representative for CD15, all 766,000 people, to go to Washington, D.C., to be a voice for we the people. Will I be perfect? No. But will I be persistent? Absolutely. Will I go and fight for all the things that the people of this great district deserves? Absolutely. And if I don't do my job, I tell the people of RGV and this entire district, vote me out, because I believe in term limits. If I'm not doing my job, vote me out.
Thank you so much, sir. Is there anything else that you would like to comment?
Not at all. I just thank you all for the opportunity, and I like to tell the people of CD15, and particularly down in RGV, Dios de Bendega. God bless you.